Scoring is down in the NFL. It's all about the passing game and the quarterbacks, right? Well, why is scoring trending downward in the NFL? Matt and I are going to try to figure that one out for you on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on Twitter, on the threads. You can get at us on the YouTube comments as well. Make sure you are subscribed up to the Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel, and you can find us everywhere you get your podcasts every stinking day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So you ran across something, and it's something we've kind of kicked around the idea here over the last, probably couple of seasons, Matt. And this is from Warren Sharp's book, right? And it is a book. There's a lot of information. I think the article is written by Rich Rebard, though.
Yes.
Who is known as, I believe, Lord Reeves.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you can preface this one for us, Matt, but essentially it's like we think of everything in the passing game in the NFL, and running backs don't matter. And if it's all about the quarterback, all about the offensive coordinators getting all these head coach jobs around the NFL because you need that scheme, well, then why is scoring trending in the other direction?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. And Rich Rebard does tremendous work. I don't know why the Lord Reeves is kind of funny, whatever. Very heavy fantasy background, but now he's working closely with Warren and doing heavy analytical work, of course, on anything Sharp is going to be big time analytics. And I'm glued to his book. I urge everyone to spend a couple bucks and go get it. It's tremendous. This actually isn't in the book, but it works in conjunction with it, and I have it because of my subscription. And what Rich does every year is he writes this article about overall NFL trends, and then he ties it into fantasy, which I think will be coming like later this week or next week. Is the use of tight ends up? Is the use of running backs down? Are people throwing more to receivers than ever? Quarterback rushing, whatever trends they are for those four fantasy positions. But he starts it with this very, very general, this is what the league is doing. And frankly, I think it's an extremely interesting conversation because there's a lot of reasons for it, but scoring is down. I mean, we've brought this up many times. Half of the league this offseason changed their offensive play callers. I mean, like, no one's happy about it. They're just blaming their guy. Why is our scoring down? Well, the whole league is down. We're not unique here. You know what I mean? And I think that's really interesting. I want to talk about some reasons why that are and are not in this article, but I think it's really fascinating. And the league office would never admit this, but I bet they're worried, to be frank. People want scoring, fantasy players, bettors. It's fun to bet the overs. I don't know this, but I'm sure the unders hit at a remarkable rate last year. So I bet that they're going to make changes, subtly or not, to try to get scoring back up.
And with these trends, because you can kind of throw the COVID year out, which was funky for a lot of reasons.
Yes and no
reasons, but
okay.
Did even the COVID year match up with this? And how far back are we going here? Is it 1 year? The scoring is kind of down in the league, and it's a one-off, and then they come back and the league scoring like crazy, and offenses strike back the next year, or is this an ongoing thing here?
So he goes back 6 years, but I really think it's worth focusing on the last three. Couple reasons. First of all, we've had 17 games now for the last two seasons, and without question, 2020 is a one-off because that was the COVID year. The strangest year in NFL history that I can remember, without question. No one in the seats, if you remember. Weird stuff. And a little bit of that carried over to 2021. And what I mean by that was maybe you lost your starting quarterback on Wednesday to COVID. You know what I mean? Like, some of that stuff absolutely happened all through 2020 and slightly into 2021. But this past year, that's not an excuse anymore. Now, I do think 2020 is a bonkers year, but I also think it's really interesting because scoring was ridiculously high that year. And maybe there weren't home field advantages and crowd noise does matter. But I also think the NFL, frankly, and this is kind of me with a tinfoil hat on, was worried about, hey, this is a crucial year for us. We don't want to lose viewers. We want this to be as fun a product as possible, even if people can't go watch it live. And this is just me remembering the season. So this is as least analytical as I can be in this conversation. Holding was legal that year. I mean, I am telling you, holding was legal in 2020. I mean, they were dragging down guys left and right. I'm not picking on Garrett Bowles, who's a good left tackle, but he always leads the league in holding penalties. 2020 was his best grade ever. You know what I mean? Like, because holding's legal, you know? And that brings me back to this isn't a tinfoil hat. This, I believe, to no end, that the biggest root of this problem, that if you gave Goodell and all the big time dudes in the league office a huge problem, and I stress this so often on this podcast, but I can't say it enough, is defensive linemen are just so much better than offensive linemen. And if they're going to allow more penalties to make up for that, or teams have to get the ball out quicker, less blitz, you know, things of that nature, that's a hard thing for the NFL to deal with without ruining their product, trying to get scoring up. But I can't stress this enough, or just go watch any combine and look at the athletes at D end and D tackle versus the athletes at center, guard, and tackle, which have gotten drastically better. You don't see big fat offensive linemen anymore, but there's still a shell of Jeffrey Simmons and Joey Bosa. And, you know, these guys are velociraptors. You know, it's like blocking a great white shark.
You and I both look at things through sort of a scouting lens as well, Matt. Yeah. And so the shape of the humans is always fascinating to me. And I'm glad you brought that up is maybe reason number one. The defensive linemen are even freakier than the offensive linemen, and the offensive linemen are also freaky. And we've gone through waves of you know what teams want. You know, there was, you know, just tough, nasty offensive linemen where your biggest guy is 280 pounds, right, in the 80s. And then you go to the 90s, and all of a sudden the Dallas Cowboys have the first ever offensive line where everybody's 300 pounds.
Yeah, right.
And all of a sudden, early 2000s, now you got to be 330, right? Like everyone's huge, 260-pound middle linebacker. Like just like
bigger the better.
Maximum everything, nutrition, other things maybe that were illegal, like whatever you would get as big as possible. And then from there, the league started getting smaller and smaller and smaller again.
Speed kills, you know,
right? But what's happening is there's still the freaks on the defensive side of the ball where they can bring a guy in who's big on early downs, and then they can shift and they can bring in a sub package and bring speed and bring the NASCAR package in at you. But you pretty much have the same five offensive linemen on the field. And so you still got to be quick. You still got to be tough, still got to be strong, but you got to move around in these wide zones. And so offensive linemen are getting smaller, but the difference in athlete and the difference in what a defense is able to do to an offensive line, as far as how people are shaped, makes it so much more difficult for the offensive linemen now, because everyone can't be big and fast and strong all at the same time on the offensive line like you can make them be on the defensive line. And so it's easier to be right on the defensive line than be right on the offensive line as far as what athletes are on the field.
Yes, and to take it even a step further, I like the point about you saying, hey, Bosa and these guys, they could go 3-4 plays hard, run off the field for a minute and a half, get some Gatorade, come right back on. You know how much that helps? I mean, that's like a hockey shift, you know? I mean, it's so much different. Where the O-lineman on a 12-play drive, snap after snap after snap. And the thing is with offensive linemen, and obviously their body types don't grow on trees. It's our TJ Maxx conversation. I mean, there's running backs walking around on the play and at corners that aren't freaky looking. But it's such a technical position that your mind and your technique is so unbelievably important, and you have to have a baseline size athleticism. That's why there's a shortage. And, oh, by the way, the people they're blocking just get freakier and freakier and longer and faster. And, I mean, remember when Mike Mamula, I mean, that was 800 years ago, ran like a 4.59, and we thought he was from another planet. Now every edge runner does. You know what I mean?
Now there's Mike Mamulas everywhere, but they can actually play.
but they're actually good at football. And
Right.
their arms are 36 inches long, But
okay, so
a lot more to unpack here. I know we got to go to break.
Yeah. So beyond the offensive line versus the defensive line, and as good as the offensive linemen are around the league, and we see a lot of people drafting a lot of offensive linemen early, the defense line are still ahead. So I think that's definitely one of the things. But let's talk about scheme as well, and why our defense is catching up. And I think there's a lot of zigging and zagging going on in the NFL, and there's a lot of teams running very similar things now on both sides of the ball. Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball right now on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose on that first bet. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from money line to over-unders to who you think is going to hit the first home run. And by the way, All-Star game is over, so baseball is back all the way into November. There's going to be baseball games every single day that you can bet on at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, all on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. I love navigating the app, navigating the desktop website as well. So easy to find what you're looking for in the sport, all the daily specials all the time at FanDuel, and building your own parlays. It's all super easy. Couldn't be more fun. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and tons of NFL bets for the 2023 season as well. So sign up today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
So, BP, I wanted to interject here real quick before we got into some of the whys. I wanted to just throw these couple numbers out there just to prove to people we're not making this up. Scoring is down. So these two bullet points to me really stand out. So remember, we just went to a 17-game schedule. So even with 271 NFL games played, remember the Hamlin game didn't make it 272. So we're one game short last year, but so what? We still had the fewest offensive touchdowns scored in a season since 2017. So there's a whole extra week minus one game, and there's still fewer touchdowns scored by offenses in 5 or 6 years. That is remarkable. And going back to the COVID year, again, the average football game in 2020 ended with 49.6 points. The average football game in 2021 ended up with 46 points scored of any kind. Last year, that number was all the way down to 43.8. So it was like 6 points difference in a 2-year stretch of an average NFL game scoring. It's crazy.
I want to stay on something we've kind of already talked about a lot,
Okay.
and the size and the shape of the human beings.
Okay.
And going beyond the offensive and defensive lines to cover all of the weapons on offenses, teams have gotten smaller on defense. We talked about those 250-pound linebackers that are gone, and what's going to replace them? 220-pound linebackers that can run and hit still, but that can cover. And if you are trying to be light and get after quarterbacks with your defensive line, and you're getting a little bit lighter at linebacker and more athletic there, we've seen the New York Giants last year were a very running back centric offense. And it's something we haven't seen a lot in the NFL as much as we had in the past, where every offense was running back centric. Derrick Henry, the 2,000-yard back, right? And not last year, but he's done that. And he's a very different, he's not a modern day running back that you would build in the lab these days. It would look more like Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara or something like that. But Christian McCaffrey and Kyle Shanahan's offense, they employ a fullback and have 21 personnel more than anybody in the league. And it's one of the best offenses in the NFL. And it's not built around a star quarterback because they haven't kind of figured that one out yet at quarterback, but they're still going to NFC championship games. So can the zig to the zag, and is this part of what we've already seen, are teams more willing to run the football? Because look, you're built to stop the pass, you're built to speed. So wait a second, we don't need to out-athlete you with our offensive linemen anymore. We can just use our advantage, which is our size, and we can run the football a little bit more, because if you're giving us 4 yards per carry because you're a little light compared to us on offense, then we're going to take it because you're giving it to us now.
100%. So one other little nugget here is offenses dropped back to pass on 60.1% of snaps last season. That's the lowest rate since 2011. So they're not calling pass plays as much anymore. And therefore, the clock moves faster. You create fewer explosive downfield plays. Scoring naturally drops a little bit. And I think that's a big reason why, and exactly how you laid it out. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant. In the defensive line physically is a massive advantage over the offensive line. I believe that to no end. But the offensive minds and today's quarterbacks, to me, have a massive advantage over the defensive folks. You know, like, of course, there's a lot of different defenses, but there's not near – these guys have figured out how to attack cover two. And, you know, like, you can only do so much on D, and there's so many unbelievable offensive minds that they have almost every defense figured out to some extent. You know, I know how to counter it. Doesn't mean you always have the right play call, but, you know, if you're vanilla on defense, you're doomed. So I think defenses have said our one advantage is our velociraptors on the front line are amazing. Our back seven are at a disadvantage. So I would rather allow them to run the ball 4, 6, 7 yards a clip with 2 high safeties, only rushing those 4 who are whipping the 5 in front of them, and make these guys sustain long drives. And yes, my manhood gets compromised a little bit as I'm getting put on my butt by fullbacks and guards, and Derrick Henry's running over me. But Tyreek Hill's not hitting an 80-yarder over my head. Then I'm not blitzing like crazy. So I pronounce this word wrong every time. I mean, the league is cylindrical, whatever. It goes in circles. I just don't know how to say that word.
Cyclical.
Yeah, cyclical. Yeah. There you go. Thank you. So I do think, and like the Giants, the Bears, the Falcons, this time last year, we might have said those are the 3 least talented teams in the whole league. But because of voluminous running, one of my new favorite terms, they can be competitive on offense, even though they're not great passing the football, because they're happy to take 5, 6 yards a clip because that's the best they can do. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so teams are trying to cut down on the big play.
Huge.
And they're trying to make teams score on 12 play drives instead of 4 or 5 play drives when you can hit the big one over the top. So it's okay with the death by 1,000 paper cuts, and Tom Brady won for 20 years with that. But that's still preferred over what Mahomes started doing to the league, you know, and hitting Tyreek Hill for huge plays. And so they're trying to cut down on that type of thing, which is really interesting. So
real quick, while you mention masters of this, because as of 2 years ago, they're going down your throat. But they, in a Brady-like fashion this past season, Burrow and Mahomes very much grew up and said, I'll throw the crosser to Kelsey all day long and pick up 6. I don't mind make 12-play drives. I'm good enough not to screw it up. Where some wild horses out there are still throwing deep into cover 2 without blitz. You know what I mean? So the great quarterbacks evolved and said, there is no perfect defense. I'll take what you give me, just like Brady did for years. I don't mind handing it to Lawrence Maroney if you're going to double Randy Moss, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And they were forced to do that. Maybe it wasn't even in their nature. Watching the documentary Quarterbacks that's on Netflix, which is really cool, and seeing quarterbacks mic'd up, and Patrick Mahomes knows this now. And so it's been ingrained, and Andy Reid and the entire offense has been ingrained. Look, we're going to see a ton of deep safeties. We're going to see too high. They're forcing us to go under. So we're going to do that. And Patrick Mahomes is noticing in a game, man, they're really dropping that. They're rotating coverage down now. They're showing us the look first, saying, okay, my pre-snap read, short throw. Then rotating after the play is like, man, are they really challenging us like that? Okay, well, if they're going to play like that, we're going to beat him. What does he do? Boom, hits one over the top the next time, because he sees what the defense are trying to do, because they're still trying to stop the thing that they know you're going to do, but they're trying to show you the thing so you'll do what they want you to do, and then you'll rotate their coverage into what you're trying to do then post-snap. And so there's this I mean, and that's what I love about getting the insights in some of these things, because it's the chess match that's going on between offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, quarterback, players on the field on the defensive side of the ball. And it's so fascinating and it's so fun. But what it reminds me of, and I want to bring this up next because there's a lot of good content going on right now. Of course, Peacock and Williamson every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find Matt Williamson doing Locked On Dynasty football as well here on the podcast network. Your team is covered. But there's the quarterbacks Netflix doc. There is Jordan Roderick of The Athletic just released what I think is a 5-part series called The Play Callers, which follows sort of the Shanahan McVay tree of coaches and tons of great insight there with all these coaches talking about scheme. And I'm listening to these things and I'm watching these things and I'm realizing that, man, I get it's a different play caller, a different team, but darn near every team in the NFL is running the same thing right now. And I think that's another huge factor of all of this that we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's stealing from each other. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're stealing from each other and they're learning from each other and they're facing the same things in practice every day. So I want to get deeper into that topic.
Okay. Next. I got one more thing before we go to break too, because I'm glad you brought up the show Quarterback. It's on Netflix. I'm like 4 or 5 episodes in. I watched 2 last night, and the Mahomes thing is perfect because without saying, he basically says it. He says. He didn't mention Tyreek, but he's like, they never would have done that to me last year with Tyreek. Those safeties aren't going to bite and robber and come up. And then he basically says, how dare you even think doing that to me? Like, I'm too good for that crap. And that was awesome. And last note, if you watch that show, the first credit is executive producer Peyton Manning. Amazing. The next name is Keith Cosrow, who's a friend of mine. He's 2 years younger than me from high school. He's been working at NFL Films forever, and he does amazing work. So I just wanted to shout out for Keith Cos. Cos is the man. That's good stuff.
We should have Keith Cos on the show. Talk about the behind the scenes.
Yeah, I definitely should. Yeah, he's a good dude. Steeler fan, of course.
Is everybody just running the same thing in the NFL now? Thank you once again, everybody, for making us your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you are subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Okay, one of the huge topics, and I believe it was Mike McDaniels, who is the Mike McDaniel. Sorry, it's not plural.
I do that every time.
McDaniel. Josh McDaniels with an S, Mike McDaniel, no S. Now the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. And he talks about one specific run concept, but it's an outside zone, wide zone concept, and that's part of the Shanahan, Kubiak, Sean McVay tree of, staple running games in the NFL, wide zone. And one play called Zorro. And he says, so we already know that, there's Sean McVay, there's Kyle Shanahan, then there's LaFleur, and there's Mike McDaniel, and there is O'Connell in Minnesota, and Arthur Smith is kind of part of that whole thing. And there is, and I'm just, I'm blanking on because there's a million of them. There's
100 more, right?
Luke Getsy and what's the Hackett, Paul Hackett's kid, Nathaniel Hackett as well. All these play callers that are from that same sort of terminology, came from the West Coast offense, but it's, play action and bootlegs and motion and wide zone running game. And the way that Mike McDaniel put it is like, look, there's 25 teams running this one concept called Zorro, which is outside zone. So even if you aren't even from that tree, you're still running this stuff. So 25 out of 32 teams, and it's probably going to grow even more this year, are running this same concept. So you have to know how to stop it, right? So you have to stop wide zone running game. You still have to be tough inside because you don't want to get gouged. And one of the things we're seeing from the wide zone teams are starting to run more gap stuff because wide 9 defenses now, you go wide versus wide. If they're trying to get wide on you, you got to go even wider, right? Which is going to create gaps inside. So you're seeing some of those wide zone teams run stuff off that to go inside more gap scheme runs and kind of counter underneath some of the super wide fronts that they're seeing on defense now. And everyone's seeing this in practice. Everyone's going against it in practice. So it's getting more difficult to run the thing that's the most popular thing because everyone sees it every day and everyone's trying to stop it weekly now in the NFL because everyone's running the same thing. And then you still have to stop the Patrick Mahomes of the world and the Joe Burrows of the world and all these great quarterbacks and Josh Allen that can get the ball deep. You want to run a too high shell. And Sean McVay was, running an offense in 2017, 2018, gets to the Super Bowl, and he's just that offense is humming with Jared Goff, and they can't be stopped, right? But someone did stop him, and that was Vic Fangio, who's now the defensive coordinator for Mike McDaniel in Miami. But he was with Chicago Bears at the time. And his answer to a lot of this was what we're seeing now spread around the league, which is sort of a cover 4 shell quarters defense, which gives you too high, and you're playing everything in front of you and make them dink and dunk on you down the field, and you're still fast and able to come up and support the run in a lot of zone coverages. And then you can rotate from there. And this gave Jared Goff and Sean McVay fits. I mean, we're talking back in 2018. So this is, 5 years ago now. And Bill Belichick, who ends up playing the Rams in the Super Bowl that year, sees that. And being the smart guy that he is like, well, it's not really our scheme. But guess what? That beat that team. So we're running that in the Super Bowl and holds Jared Goff and the Rams to 3 points in that Super Bowl or something.
I got 2 weeks to prepare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now guess what? Every team runs that on defense now too, right? Including Vic Fangio, but everyone's got a lot of quarters. It's the most popular thing that teams are changing to in the NFL. So now San Francisco 49ers, perfect example. What do they run on offense? Shanahan offense, wide zone, a lot of that, play action, motion. What do they run on defense? Quarters coverage. Sometimes they rotate out of it and, try to do some cover 3, a lot more zone than man. And so now they're going against each thing every week, and they see it most weeks on offense or defense from the teams they're going against as well. And I think that's another part of it is what's going to be the next thing, because the now thing right now is, and it's funny because and Jordan Rodriguez did a fantastic job. It's totally worth listening to this podcast series. It's fantastic listening to all these teams and these coaches talking about how all this stuff came together. But she asked all the coaches, well, what do you think the next thing is? None of them wanted to say it. They have an idea. They all kind of think, well, I think we're going to try to do this now to go off that, right? So we'll see what that ends up being. But everybody sees the same thing so much. And so when you put all these things together with scheme and scouting and the players that you have on the field, you're getting very positionless on offense and defense. So if you have a running back who can catch and a wide receiver who can run, and you have a quarterback that can throw short and throw deep, and you have linebackers who can stop the run, but that can cover as well. And you have defensive linemen who are stout enough to take on blocks against the run, but can get after the quarterback as well. So you need everybody to do everything, and you can't have 22 first-round picks.
It doesn't work that way, yeah. The guys get hurt.
Right. And so it's amazing what teams are coming up with, what they're able to do, all the late rotation, all the just the masking of everything and the movement. And can there be more movement? Are we going to see even more motion, even more rotation after the snap? For defenses, it's fascinating, and I can't wait to see how teams combat this. But at some point, everyone's running the same thing. There's going to be something coming from somewhere, and I wonder if it's coming from a different tree, which is going to be the thing that beats it.
So much to unpack there, and that's a week worth of podcast. It's awesome.
Way too long for me. I didn't even give you time to
no, it's all good.
An answer for that.
So a couple things just to back up what you're saying about league-wide trends. On defense, man coverage percentage dropped from 2020 to 2021 by about 3%. And then another 3% from 2021 to last year. Blitz is the same way. Blitz is down heavily from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. And nickel is up, from 2020, they were at 59%. Now it's all the way to 63.3. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot over the course of the season. So every defense is saying less man, less blitz, more nickel. And a lot of that correlates with Fangio and the too high stuff and all those things you said. So 2 nuggets I want to throw out there too are the Ravens, to me, are a really interesting case in point. The Lamar old Ravens, because they destroyed teams the first time they played them. Lamar versus the NFC is ridiculously favored to Lamar. But when he plays the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers year after year, he's still great, but he's come back to earth a little bit. And what I'm going with this is nobody plays offense like the Ravens, especially 3 years ago, 4 years ago, where the foundation of our offense is a quarterback running. And to take it up a notch, not only are they using a fullback a ton, but Patrick Ricard isn't similar to even to Juszczyk. I mean, he is a guard. I mean, he's 300 pounds
on him at least, probably.
Right. And he plays 75% of the snaps. So no team in a short week is properly prepared for that version. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, in that if you can just be different, it doesn't even mean, and I think that offense hit a wall, but it was really good for 4 or 5 years and took the league by storm. I do think quarterback running, though, is now, unless you're Brady, unless you're off the charts pocket passer processing, is becoming even more of a cheat code. Like, we know this in fantasy has been the case. So here's an unbelievable stat that I just heard the other day. The last 5 years, every 3rd and 3 or less, okay? So that happens many times a game, many times in the last 5 years, where an offense is in 3rd and 3 or less. If it's a quarterback run, they convert the first down 80% of the time. Like pushing Jalen Hurts in the butt behind the best offensive line with your 10 blockers is almost stealing now. But this is even 3rd and 3 or less. If I just run my quarterback, and it could be Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford, it just has enough wheels to do it, it's almost impossible to defend. I have a hard enough time defending 5 guys out in a route, let alone a great run. Justin Fields in the background in the backfield dropping back. It's almost mandatory now.
I want to hear what some of the listeners have to say about this, because we're out of time to talk about this, and we could probably go on for hours. Before in our pre-production meeting, Matt and I were like, well, let's talk about scoring down. Well, do we need to have another thing? Do we need to talk about? And we're like, yeah, you know what? No, I don't think we do. And definitely we didn't. We could have a whole series on this and reasons why, and our hypothesis of what we could see next and what's the answers to some of these things. And the league is going to tell us, because there's a lot of guys that are a lot of folks a lot smarter than us that are going to tell us really what that answer is and what they think about it. So I can't wait to see what that is in 2023, obviously, and beyond. Thanks everybody for making Peacock.
Please tweet us and mention it, because maybe we'll even do another podcast just answering your questions or going down different avenues, because there's so much to unpeel here.
Yeah, we will have a mailbag, by the way. So Peacock, at Williamson NFL, drop a comment or a question on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed up everywhere you find your podcast. Matt and I back tomorrow right here. Peacock and Williamson.